Alright, so Attack on Titan Season 4 Part 2 Episode 8, put simply, felt very different. It was very different from pretty much all of Season 4 and arguably the entirety of the series, and considering how much so many of us enjoy the series, that may for a lot of people be an unfortunate thing. This episode opens up with Hange gunning down her fellow scouts, which is a visibly painful ordeal for the character. She is the foremost Titan expert and over the course of her many years of service has orchestrated a score of Titan-based exterminations. And although the people of Paradis now know that Titans were once people, and more specifically Eldians like themselves, killing a person in cold blood, especially a comrade, is understandably a difficult thing for her. But of course, desperate times call for desperate measures, as their entire reasoning for being there at all was to hunt Hange and Levi down. Levi was still very much alive, and according to Hange, who'd patched him up, this was on account of his Ackerman blood. At the time, Hange believed that the two of them would not be able to stop Zeke anymore, and so it was up to Commander Pixies, or Armin, to handle things. However, as we all know, Commander Pixies is no longer alive, which would mean that the expectation may solely be placed on the shoulders of Armin. With how the country was shaping up to be in the favor of the Jaegerists, they would ultimately be fugitives for the rest of their lives. However, to follow Eren's declaration, which completely bewildered Hange, Levi would awaken and explain what had happened between himself and Zeke, now showing us the loss of his two fingers. However, Levi had no intentions of running and hiding, and he knew that Hange didn't either, which would then bring them to their meeting with Magath and Peak. It was like meeting their off-brand counterparts from Marley. Magath would provide a sort of backhanded compliment to Levi, likening his strength on the battlefield to be on par with those of the Titan shifters, but he would question how the man would fare against a bullet from his gun, claiming that he'd be unable to dodge it, which is pretty funny to me considering just how good Levi has proven himself to be in that regard on account of his early Season 3 endeavors, but whatever. Right now, he was in no shape to fight. They simply came with a proposition, as for the time being, their goals aligned, and that was that. Levi's interest in entering the fray may be chalked up to his desire for revenge against Zeke, but for Hange, she was against Eren's plan for the rest of the world from the moment she heard it. So much so that when mentioning Eren in this discussion, she would correct herself to not use his name and instead opt to refer to him as the founding Titan, which for a Titan expert like herself is certainly a big deal. It is the severance of her sentimentality from him, which is pretty unfortunate considering all that they had been through together in the past, but I guess that relationship of theirs has been waning for quite some time now. From there, we would make our way back to the people who were formerly behind the walls as the Colossal Titans continue their march onwards into the night. And the sheer fact that these things were still moving elsewhere after so much has already transpired and passed should just go to show just how many of them there truly are. And for each of the characters displayed over the course of this, their situations and sentiments would be all too clear. For John, he would cover his ears, attempting to ignore the problem, hoping it would just go away, but obviously, this was an exercise in futility. For Mikasa, she would begin tearing up, being oh so emotionally conflicted by it all. Hitch would be sound asleep as the rumbling was well beyond her ability and or interest to stop, so there was no point in missing sleep over it. However, Annie, the girl who had been virtually asleep for years and had been quite the insomniac before then, would not do so here. She was awake and continued to watch on as the Colossal Titans made their way onwards to her homeland. Reiner was fast asleep and defeated, while Armin and Gabi raced on through the night in an effort to catch up to Connie and Falco. And speaking of Connie and Falco, Connie's conscience was beginning to catch up to him as well, as he felt horribly for desiring to sacrifice a child that trusted him for the sake of getting his own mother back. He'd even wonder what Sasha would say. That being said, when they did make it to Connie's hometown, Falco had already begun to recover his lost memories, and oddly enough, while they were in the woods, Connie had been speaking to himself, giving enough details for Falco to put things together. From which point, Connie would reveal to Falco his Titan mother, which only made things more tense and concerning. But Connie, being a terrible liar, with guilt all over his face, proposed that the two brushy Titans' teeth, referring to it as a rare opportunity. What was the most ridiculous attempt at deception possible? To interrupt this, however, would be the outcries of Gabi, followed by those of Armin, which prompted Connie to get a bit more serious about keeping Falco hostage. And here, Armin was conflicted, just as conflicted as he had been while talking to Mikasa in the previous episode. and this was because he didn't feel deserving of the power he now possessed, the Colossal Titan. He now believed that the commander should have been chosen among the two, and thanks to this, he would soon be as bold as to sacrifice himself for the sake of protecting Falco and restoring Connie's mother, something that ultimately Connie would stop his friend from doing, which then finally opened his own eyes to the travesty he was on the verge of committing. Now, if it wasn't for Falco's ties to Marley's key players, I wonder if Armin would have gone at all. I mean, he was literally responsible for a Titan nuke on Marley that killed men, women, and children. In fact, prior to speaking with Gabi about it all, Armin seemed to be rather at peace with the whole thing, which is very interesting. Maybe not in terms of his conscience, but he wasn't going to go out of his way to stop it. Meanwhile, Falco would cry as he finally recalled the untimely demise of his dear older brother. Which then brought us to Mikasa and Luis, her biggest fan, who was on the verge of death, and wrapped around her neck was the scarf Eren had once given to Mikasa. And as Luis, this young girl who had so thoroughly admired Mikasa, essentially being to her what Mikasa was to Eren in regards to reverence, laid there dying, Mikasa's only concern was the recovery of her scarf. It is this especially callous display from Mikasa that emulates the behavior of Eren. Now, apparently when Luis spoke to Eren briefly about it, he talked about wanting to throw the thing away, which perturbed Mikasa, but that was as much of a reaction as she was willing to give here. The comparisons are certain, but this scene for me was just uncomfortable for a lack of better words. I mean, at least Eren was nice to Mikasa before, yet even as this girl was dying, Mikasa wouldn't even give her the time of day. We would then have a brief moment with the Jaegerists foreboding what would come later on, which then brings us to the point of the episode where I just had to pause because I could not watch it straight. The pie scene. This is the first time Armin and Connie see Annie in the flesh in years. And the last time they did, she had just slaughtered dozens of their comrades. Yet what we received was a comedy bit about her eating pie. And with no confrontation for anything she had done at all, they were all friends and off to save the day. I'm sorry, this was just too much for me. Moving on, we would have the intended executions of Yelena and Onyonkopon. Yelena had nothing left to live for in the wake of her faith being crushed, and Onyonkopon, after fighting alongside the alien people, was on the verge of having his own people wiped out, with only a future under the boot of several xenophobes to look forward to. And so he preferred the allure of death. However, the only thing to truly be executed in this instance would be a plan, which would have the Card Titan rescue these two along with John. Now, how exactly they managed to get into contact with Magath, the Card Titan, Hanj, and Levi is not revealed. There's no intersection between the two groups to be seen at any point during this episode, but that's not a plot hole or anything. We'll most definitely receive an explanation a bit later. After this, we would have an exchange between Peak and Hanj about the Card Titan brushing her teeth, which is pretty funny considering Connie's dumb plan earlier. Now, John's involvement in all of this, for as uncertain and conflicted as he may have been, was inevitable. It's just the sort of person he is. He will be the first to complain, but also the first to actually do something about it, and from my own life experience, I have a soft spot for those sorts of people. Now, securing Yelena was part of the deal struck between these two parties. This isn't exactly the time for pettiness, and so their interest in her is liable to be related to Zeke and Eren in some capacity, because they are kind of a big deal right now. But to close things out, we would have Reiner taking a kick to the head as he was told to get up, as it was time to go save the world. And shout out to Mappa, man, this shot in the manga has been clowned for ages now, effectively being dubbed the Cringe Avengers, and they composed it differently here. And I must say that for as much as I enjoy Marvel stories, I don't want that to intersect with Attack on Titan all too much. At least not any more than we already received with the Attack on Avengers crossover comic. I can somewhat see the MCU influences here, and I can say that it was for the best. Regardless, I seriously miss Eren right now. I'm really curious how you guys may feel about all this, especially if you are anime only. Please let us know what you think about this episode in particular in the comments. I'm trying to be as optimistic as possible, but admittedly, it is pretty difficult when plenty of the things I most thoroughly enjoyed about this series seem to be coming undone. But to be here for more, be sure to subscribe to Plot Armor with notifications on. We also have our brand new channel, Plot Armor Comics, where we cover things like the actual Avengers, so check us out if you haven't already. But when it comes to bringing you some of the best Attack on Titan content on the platform, Plot Armor has you covered. As always, I'm Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.